Hello, do we have anyone on from Craig, Alaska today?
Hello, how are you?
Hi.
Sorry. It's budget day.
Are we ready to go, or are we waiting for students to show up?
I was hoping that I was going to have 5 or 6. Is Craig the only site that you guys are doing this with?
Well, we had 3 other schools that were registered, but they dropped off at the last minute. So you guys are going to be it.
Oh, if you guys want to get started, let me go unlock a door. I have a couple who usually get here within 10 minutes. A couple of my homeschoolers. Okay. So you'll see them. You'll see them come in.
Okay, I'm not seeing you right now. I'm just seeing the slides, so I can hear you though.
And I should warn you, I don't know if you can see the room. Sometimes I have students that don't want to be on camera, so they'll be here, but they'll be forward of the camera because their parents don't want them to be on camera.
That's fine. James, can you bring the slide down so I can see Craig Public Library, please? There we go.
And Linda, if you'd like, you could probably go ahead and get started for the benefit of those viewing on the live stream. And as the students from Craig join, maybe we can have them join in progress.
Do you want to start the intro slides for me? Okay. Hi, my name's Linda Rosenblum. I'm the Education and Teacher Corps Program Manager with the National Park Service from Washington, D.C. offices. Welcome to our Presidential Primary Sources Project event for today. Our presenters today will be Jennifer and Kendra from the Andrew Johnson National Historic Site. And Craig, Alaska Public Library is going to be our only live interactive site, but we do expect that there'll be other folks that are live streaming this as well. To get started, we're going to recognize our partners in the project, Internet 2 being our host, the National Park Service, and the National Archives and Records Administration's presidential libraries are the presenting institutions that will be providing the content for this series. Magpie and Blue Jeans Network are also providing technical support. So we want to thank all of the partners that are involved in this project. We do have a disclaimer that we'd like to post for you all. The participants in this conference may be videotaped and streamed and archived, and so that we ask that the schools or parents that are participating in this be aware, and it's a responsibility of the school and or the parents to provide the authority for the students to be shown on camera. So right now, since we only have one live participant, would somebody from Craig, Alaska like to approach the camera and say hello and tell us who you are, and since you're not a school, you could tell us what grade or what class you're in, and say hello to the participants online.
Hi, my name is Amy Marshall. I'm the librarian here in Craig. I'm waiting for students to show up. Craig, Alaska. I don't know if you can see me, but this is how we do Alaska. And we are all the way down here. And we are on an island that is off the coast, Prince of Wales Island. And everybody here is on island time. So I said this started at 9:30, hoping that that would get folks here, but at 10 o'clock, I think they're on to me now. So about 10 minutes after 10, quarter after, we'll start seeing them trickle in. And I'm expecting homeschoolers from 4th grade up to 7th grade.
Okay, great. So our presenters today will be Kendra and Jennifer from the Andrew Johnson site. Jennifer Pierce is the Chief of Education and Interpretation, and Kendra is the museum technician at Andrew Johnson. So at this point, I'm going to sign off and let them take over the presentation. Thanks.
All right, well, good morning to all of you in Alaska. It's afternoon over here. My name is Jennifer, and I'm a park ranger at Andrew Johnson National Historic Site. My job is to teach education programs about our 17th president.
And I am Kendra. I am the museum technician here at the site, and I'm the one who gets to take care of all the fantastic primary resources that we have.
We're happy to welcome you to Greenville, Tennessee.
Greenville is a small town in upper northeast Tennessee.
Greenville is located approximately 250 miles east of Nashville, Tennessee, our state's capital city. Today's primary presidential sources project is all about leadership qualities in a time of crisis. Andrew Johnson faced many crises while he served as our 17th president, mainly because of the times in which he lived. So today we'll be looking at some of the decisions that he had to make and his reactions to those times of the 1800s. We might have a few questions for you as students come in. So if we have students that are willing to participate to answer questions along the way, we're glad to have you. And just make sure that you remember to unmute your phone so you can answer the questions with us.
Some crises that have been faced by our nation's 44 presidents include wars, negotiations with other countries, protecting our borders, and even preservation of public lands.
Now, I know we have at least one participant in the library today, and I sure do appreciate that. So I'm going to put you on the spot, or whoever would like to answer. The first question is simply, what crises did Andrew Johnson face as our president?
Well, I think it's pretty much after the Civil War. So he was there during Reconstruction. So I'm sure that was quite the time.
Absolutely. You are spot on with that answer. We're going to be looking at his presidency at that time and the decisions that he made and what made him a leader for our country.
And to start our program today, our superintendent would like to share a special message.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Watts. I'm the superintendent of Andrew Johnson National Historic Site and National Cemetery here in this special place in Greenville, Tennessee. Today you're going to learn the story of Andrew Johnson, the 17th President of the United States, who didn't expect to become our 17th President, at least not under the circumstances in which he did. He was thrust into the limelight at the tragic death of the beloved 16th President, Abraham Lincoln, at a time in this country's history right after the Civil War, when the North hated the South and the South's way of life had changed forever, and over 4 million enslaved people would become free because of the Civil War, but they had no homes, little jobs, and little opportunity. Over time, his decisions were very, very challenging. Those decisions would affect our past, our present, and our future. In today's program, look for the primary and secondary sources that we protect here at Andrew Johnson. These are artifacts that are over 150 years old, and they shaped his life and in turn have shaped ours. I challenge you to become an active learner today, to continue to protect our public lands. It takes all of us working together to preserve and protect our rich tapestry of American history. There are over 400 sites in the National Park System, and artifacts and stories are told through all of them. But you may also find these at presidential libraries, museums, homes, your grandfather's home, grandmother's home, and maybe your own. It is our role together, preserving and protecting these wonderful artifacts, that will give us a chance to preserve and protect them for future generations, and because they all belong to you.
To look at how events in Andrew Johnson's early life played a role in shaping his character. Ranger Burke will tell us more.
In 1808, Andrew Johnson was born into a modest structure very much like this one. Now, while his family, his father Jacob, his mother Polly, and his older brother William may have called the one room upstairs home, this part of the house would have been much more of a very hot, very busy place, as it would have been a kitchen just outside Casso's Inn, a very busy 25-bed hotel where Johnson's father Jacob was a porter. Now, Jacob's reputation was one of hard and honest work ethic, and it had gained him some respect in town, but the family was decidedly very poor. It would be that point when Johnson's father dies, when Johnson is 3 years old. Johnson's mother, not having a lot of options as to what she could do with her two sons at that point, entered them both into an apprenticeship. Johnson and his brother William were apprenticed to a gentleman in Raleigh. His name was James Selby. Mr. Selby was a tailor. Being in an apprenticeship at that point in time was more of a have-to thing for lots of folks and not necessarily something to be proud of. When you entered into a contract with a master tradesman, you were bound to work for that particular person for a period of 7 years. Basically, the person could tell you where you could go and what you could do for that length of time, which really put Johnson's early experience much akin to that of a slave. Being apprenticed to a master tailor in the time period for a young man like Johnson would have been an event that would have forced him to grow up very fast. But one thing that young boys could never outgrow, it appears, is mischief. Johnson and a few other boys in the town had been struck by a rather pretty young lady that they had seen around in the area. One night, the prank of pelting her house with rocks and sticks seemed to be the thing to do. But the young girl's mother, lady of the house named Mrs. Wells, did see the boys do this. Johnson was included, threatened there to have them arrested and file a lawsuit. This would be an event that struck fear in the hearts of Johnson and the other boys, and they would soon leave Raleigh, North Carolina. Now, fleeing at that point in time not only was getting away from the immediate threat of the bit of trouble he had entered into with the young girl's mother, but also it would void his contract with Mr. Selby, which made Johnson more or less a fugitive. Mr. Selby, recognizing the value that Johnson had brought to his work and trade, sought to get him back. He would print handbills and put them all over town, hoping that someone will see Andrew Johnson or his brother William and return them to Selby. Selby offered $10 reward, which in the time period was a grand sum of money. The bill gives description of the Johnson boys, but it also leads us to know that Johnson was very good and had all but mastered his craft, because Selby said, "I will give $10 for the return of Andrew and William Johnson, or I will give $10 for the return of Andrew Johnson alone," which said a lot about Johnson even at a very young age. For this reason, Johnson will never work or live in Raleigh, North Carolina again. A few years will pass until Johnson does return to Raleigh, but this time would be to get his mother and at that point his stepfather, and they would come across the mountains into East Tennessee. Greenville did not appear to be a destination of sorts for Andrew Johnson, but merely a place to lay his head for a night or two. But a young lady will enter the picture. Things will change fast, and Johnson will set roots in Greenville, Tennessee.
Clearly a pivotal time in Andrew Johnson's childhood. I mean, could you imagine having to go to work at age 9? He really must have felt a determination to succeed as he learned the value of education, and he probably was inspired by the successful people around him.
In fact, James Selby, the tailor in Raleigh, would hire people to come read to the apprentices as they sewed. One man brought a book called The American Speaker. Andrew Johnson was so inspired by this book that he asked the man if he could borrow it. The man told him he could have it if he would learn to read it, and he did. Here we have Andrew Johnson's very first book. It's a book of speeches, and it may very well have inspired his future as a politician. In its preface, it says that it hopes to inspire the callow, which means inexperienced, youth, to study and learn and to someday plead their country's cause with lips of fire. And that's exactly what Andrew Johnson did.
In fact, education was becoming so important to Andrew Johnson that later he asked his wife Eliza to help tutor him using her school books. So we have some neat primary sources here to show you. The first one is an image taken from one of Eliza's books, in which you can see Andrew has practiced writing his name to the point where he's run out of room and it begins to go down the edge of the page. We also have another photograph of a book that shows where he'd been practicing his arithmetic problems. And remember, he never had that formal education that so many of you are receiving right now.
Eliza would read to him while he worked in his tailor shop, and he would hire men of town to read to him as well. He would pay them 50 cents a day. So you can see that education was very important to him. He carried on the tradition that Mr. Selby had in his own tailor shop.
So in that very tailor shop, we have a photograph of it here. By the way, this building is still in existence. It's protected by the National Park Service, and it's now enclosed in a memorial building for its preservation. But across the street from the tailor shop is a brick home. He did so well in his business that he purchased this building for his family to live in. Obviously, this is a nice photograph as a resource, but we don't have any photographs of Johnson doing his work in the tailor shop. But we do have this really neat drawing, which clearly illustrates what it would have looked like to visit Johnson as he's sitting cross-legged on his tailoring table, and his wife, Eliza, reads to him.
Soon, Andrew Johnson's tailor shop became the hangout spot for the men of town. They enjoyed debating current events, and they discovered Andrew Johnson was so good at it, they encouraged him to run for office, which he did. So let's have Burke tell us about Andrew Johnson's early work life and his start in politics.
And here we are outside Johnson's tailor shop. As word of Johnson's honest work ethic and his attention to quality and detail spread, so would his business grow. Johnson always promised his customers a good fit and that his work would always be on time. The tailor shop was also a hub of social gatherings for men, coming in to be fitted for clothes, sharing news stories, and debating current issues. Perhaps it was Johnson's participation in these lively discussions that encouraged him to form strong opinions and political views about the future of this nation. As people began to recognize Johnson's talent for speaking, he was invited to join a debate society at a local college, Greenville College. Here he would continue to hone his oratory skills. Now, strong debating skills and the respect that he already had within the community would see Johnson elected to his first public offices, first as town alderman and then to follow would be mayor of Greenville.
Johnson became a well-known speaker. People would come to his tailor shop and the men would debate. So I'm wondering, as I think I see a few more people joining into the Craig Library, if anybody would like to take a shot at this next question. If all these men were coming to debate in the tailor shop in the early 1800s, what would have been the topics of debate at that time? What do you think? Do we have any guesses on that question? Well, we know from primary sources that they would have talked about railroad expansion in the United States, as well as Cherokee land jurisdiction in East Tennessee. Because it was at this time in his life that Johnson was really aligning himself with his political ambition. And he wanted to be a strong voice for the working people, which that's who he was. He was a working man. He also knew that the United States Constitution was the most important guiding document for the United States of America. And he based almost every political decision he made on the United States Constitution. In fact, he went on to serve as Greenville's alderman, mayor, a Tennessee state representative, a Tennessee state senator, a United States representative, the governor of Tennessee, and a United States senator. So he was really getting involved in politics, but it started small for him, just like if you were watching today and you have an interest in politics, students could start just by getting involved with their own school governments.
Absolutely. Well, by the end of 1860, the nation had become so divided on so many topics that the southern states decided to separate or secede from the Union. Andrew Johnson's actions now become very significant. He's been giving pro-Union speeches in Greenville, Tennessee. He escapes to Washington, where he pledges his loyalty to the Union as a United States senator. In fact, he was the only Southern senator to retain his seat during the secession crisis. Can you imagine the courage that would have taken?
It's pretty amazing, and it's a pretty big deal because most of Tennessee was pro-Confederacy. They were willing to separate from the Union. But Andrew Johnson, like most East Tennesseans, was against secession.
He said, "Let us fight a war of words, not a war of swords."
In fact, it was his loyalty to the Union that gained him an appointment by President Abraham Lincoln to become the military governor of Tennessee. And as military governor, he emancipated the slaves of Tennessee, and he led Tennessee back into the Union to be the first state to rejoin.
By the time Abraham Lincoln was ready for his second term, he chose Andrew Johnson to run with him as his vice president, undoubtedly because Andrew Johnson had stayed loyal to the Union and because Lincoln was ready to go ahead and start trying to bring the North and South back together again.
Now here's another great primary source. It's a photograph. I'll bet you can figure out what that is. Look at the thousands of people surrounding Abraham Lincoln in Washington, D.C. It's his second inaugural address. It doesn't look very much different than what we see today on the news when a president is sworn into office. So we're going to go to Ranger Daniel now and learn a little bit more about what was going on in East Tennessee.
I am standing outside the homestead of Andrew Johnson. Purchased in 1851, this large home demonstrates how far the once penniless Tailor had come. Johnson and his family were away from this house for nearly 8 years. During the time he was in Nashville as the military governor, as well as his time as vice president and president. During these years, East Tennessee had become a hotbed of skirmishes between Union and Confederate soldiers. Let us take you inside the house, to the bedrooms of the second floor, and hear from a local resident who witnessed the strife.
Greenville was a mess during the Civil War. The town was occupied by soldiers from the north and then the south, and back and forth it went between them. This town was an important location for troops because of the nearby train depot. The Southern troops were not happy about Johnson's alliance to the north, so they left their thoughts here on these walls, carved into the plaster. One even called him a traitor. Others may have been bored or lonely. Someone wrote here, "For my home in Kentucky." I'm standing in Mrs. Johnson's bedroom, but this house sat empty for a long time. While serving as military governor, Andrew Johnson freed all the slaves in Tennessee. It's no wonder Mr. Lincoln chose Mr. Johnson to be his vice president during his second term. Lincoln wanted to rejoin the North and the South. In 1865, Mr. Lincoln was setting his plan into motion to restore the United States, but then tragedy struck.
When Abraham Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater on April 14, 1865, he was taken across the street to the Petersen House. Now, this drawing is fairly common in most social studies textbooks, but it is merely a representative of all the people that would have come to see the president on his deathbed, because we know the Petersen House was far too small to fit this many people. But we do know Andrew Johnson came through. In fact, he's pictured the third person in on the side of this image here. Andrew Johnson was now our 17th president, and boy, did he have a rough road ahead of him.
He sure did. And it's now that the character traits he'd adopted through his many years of holding political office and following the United States Constitution came into play during his presidency in the years following the Civil War. Andrew Johnson had intended to closely follow Abraham Lincoln's lenient plan of Reconstruction, or restoration as they called it, for the defeated Southern states.
Now, Lincoln's plan stated that if 10% of all the men who had voted in the prior 1860 election took an oath of allegiance and supported emancipation, then those states could begin to draft revised constitutions and rejoin the nation. So, in fact, Johnson was following Lincoln's plan to rejoin the nation without punishment.
Congress, however, wanted to break the southern states into military districts and appoint military commanders in charge of each of those districts. They would have to write a new state constitution, which Congress would have to approve. They wanted to include universal male suffrage, including the former slaves, and they required that states ratify the 14th Amendment. Now, the 14th Amendment dealt with citizenship rights and equal protection under the laws.
Now, there were parts to both plans that would have worked, but neither side was willing to compromise. And Johnson stood firm that he felt the actions of Congress were unconstitutional, and they violated the states because the states were unrepresented at this time.
Since neither side would compromise, Congress passed the Tenure of Office Act. This act said that the president could not remove a member of his cabinet without asking Congress's permission.
Now, there's a word that we often hear in the news today, a cabinet. And a cabinet is simply a group of advisors to the president. So Johnson had inherited Abraham Lincoln's cabinet, and he soon found out that not every member of his cabinet was going to agree with him.
In fact, Andrew Johnson's Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, allied himself so often with the radical Republicans that Andrew Johnson decided to test this Tenure of Office Act, which he felt was unconstitutional anyway. Before too long, he fired Mr. Stanton.
And as a result of firing Edwin Stanton, Andrew Johnson was impeached. Now, I know we have a whole bunch of different audiences out there today watching the show, and not everybody knows the definition of the word impeach. So I'm going to ask our friends at the Craig Library in Alaska if anybody's willing to give it a shot to tell us, what do you think the word impeachment really means? We have a lot of folks that come to visit us. Oh, go ahead.
Do they have their microphone on mute? Maybe that's...
Does anyone want to give us a guess from Craig, Alaska? Well, the word impeachment means to be accused of a crime. It doesn't mean removal from office, but Andrew Johnson was impeached for breaking the Tenure of Office Act. It means that the House of Representatives accuses the president, and then the president is then tried by the Senate. But in this trial, we soon learned that Andrew Johnson didn't appoint those members in his cabinet. They came from Abraham Lincoln's presidency.
The trial was a big to-do. They printed different color impeachment tickets to gain entrance to the trial each day. Many people attended, including An author named Mark Twain, who was reporting for the event, who would later go on to write such classics as Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn.
Wait a second, so you're telling me those are the exact actual tickets they would have handed out for the 1868 impeachment trial?
They sure are. Why else do you think I'm wearing gloves?
Wow, that's pretty awesome for a primary source right here. Now, the trial lasted several months, and at the end of that trial, Andrew Johnson was found not guilty by one vote. If 2/3 of the senators had voted differently, he would have been found guilty and removed from office. Can you imagine the suspense and the angst of the family waiting to hear the verdict of this trial?
Wow. We do know that his wife Eliza had been waiting in such suspense that when she was told he was acquitted, her hands trembled as she said, "I knew he'd be acquitted. I knew it."
Well, Andrew Johnson was found not guilty in this trap set by Congress. But for the remainder of his presidency, as you can imagine, he and Congress didn't get along so well. But as one of his last presidential acts, he pardoned all former Confederate soldiers and even the former Confederate president, Jefferson Davis himself. Now, by doing this, he was fulfilling the pledge from Lincoln's second inaugural, which stated he wanted to rejoin the Union with malice toward none and charity for all. Let's take a moment. I'm not quite sure if we've got Craig Library back on, but if someone is there and would like to try to answer a question, we have one for you. And that question is simply, what leadership skills do we see Johnson exhibiting during this difficult time in his presidency? Does anybody want to try to describe his leadership skills at this point? No takers on that? Okay, well, I think he's showing quite a bit of courage, determination, and his steadfastness to what he believes, especially with the U.S. Constitution.
Indeed. Andrew Johnson and his family returned home from Washington in March of 1869. 5 years later, Andrew Johnson would become the only former president to return to Washington, D.C. as a United States Senator.
Having been vindicated and now serving the public once again, it is unfortunate that he only attended one session before he died of a stroke. He's now buried with his family in the Andrew Johnson National Cemetery. But let's go to Ranger Eric to learn more.
Even in death, Andrew Johnson's commitment to the Constitution was evident. Over 5,000 people followed his funeral procession to his final resting place. Greenville and the White House were draped in mourning. Andrew Johnson is buried here with his American flag and his copy of the United States Constitution. He's buried in the National Cemetery with his family and 1,700 veterans and their spouses. While Andrew Johnson's political impact is still debated, there's no doubt that Andrew Johnson remained loyal to the Union during a time of crisis and stood firm as a defender of the United States Constitution.
Before we close out our program today, we would like to ask you all a question, everyone who's watching out there. How do you want people to remember you? Andrew Johnson never had a high school yearbook, but if he had one, I sometimes wonder what people might have written about him inside of it.
Well, actually, one of his friends, a personal acquaintance who later became a historian, wrote this. Johnson was stubborn in political opinions, where he thought himself right, defiant, ready to fight for them. Yet, those opinions were just, enlightened, and such as only a sound and independent statesman could have formed.
We also have a book that was written by his personal bodyguard while he was in the White House, a man named William Crook. And in this book, called Memories of the White House, Mr. Crook writes of Andrew Johnson. Fearless of everything and everybody, he would stand his ground if necessary against the whole world. Well, I think it's pretty obvious that Andrew Johnson faced many obstacles all throughout his life, but it was those very obstacles which formed his character and led him to a position of leadership as our 17th President of the United States. I really hope that everyone has enjoyed today's program, and it's rather fitting that Alaska was one of our audience members today, the Craig Library in Alaska. There's a connection between our 17th President and the state of Alaska, which you might be well aware of, was that in 1867, William Seward, as part of Andrew Johnson's cabinet, purchased the land of Alaska for $7.2 million. And I wonder if you know how much value $7.2 million would have in today's dollars. Do you know, Kendra?
I do know. Can I say?
Go for it.
$116 million.
So a pretty good investment way back in 1867 to have that foresight of the resources that we share today and what unites us north, south, east, and west as the United States of America. So we really want to thank you for your time today. And if we do have participants in Alaska who would like to ask a few questions, we'd be more than happy to field any questions you might have. Linda, do you think we have some folks out there?
Is anyone from Alaska still on the line that would like to ask some questions of our presenters today? Make sure that your microphone is off mute so that we can hear you. Okay. Well, if not, we'd like to thank Kendra and Jennifer for their presentation today. And we'd like to thank the folks that are live streaming and watching us live online, as well as our interactive partner in Craig, Alaska at the Public Library. And we hope that you will join us for our future events coming up. We will be hosting events live from the Eisenhower Farm in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, from the Herbert Hoover Library, and also from the Harry S. Truman Library in Independence, Missouri, coming up later in this series. So we hope that you'll be able to join us for those as well. We also want to thank our partners, Internet 2, the Blue Jeans Network, Magpie, the Presidential Libraries, and thank you from us here at the National Park Service. And we hope to join you again soon. And this will end our session. So from Topeka, Kansas, I'm signing out. Thank you and goodbye. Okay.